We're joined now by the Shadow Scotland Minister, Paul Sweeney. Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, Philip Hammond says this budget delivers for Scotland. What do you think?
Well, I think it's actually a rather insipid budget, and beyond all the bluster, the fundamentals are that this is the first time in recorded economic history that this country has seen growth projections under 2% for every year for the forecast period. That is unprecedented, and it just shows how shambolic this government's economic management has been in recent years, and particularly with Brexit, that we're seeing that such sluggish growth rates, which are compounded by stagnating wages, no real wage rise since 2010, and also productivity that is on the wane.
So if we look at wages then, and particularly public sector wages, what would you like to see in terms of an increase?
We would like to see an end to the public sector pay cap and a setting of the minimum wage at a minimum £10 per hour. So I realise a real living wage for all people in this country. That's what we committed to in our manifesto, and we'd like to see that realised. Today we saw another sleight of hand by the Chancellor where he announced an increase to the minimum wage, but it was actually well below what was originally forecast back in March.
And in terms of the money coming to Scotland, there seems to be a bit of a row about that this evening. What's your take? Is Scotland getting its fair share here or not?
Well, the headline figure of £2 billion is obviously going to be spread over 3 years. So we have to test whether that is actually going to represent a real terms cut in public spending when inflation is taken into account, and also how those budgetary lines will be tied into spending commitments that are ring-fenced. Well, what we want to see particularly is when, in the case of VAT exemption for fire and rescue services being removed, we want to see that money ring-fenced with the Scottish Government to ensure that it's invested properly in our public services. But also, I think we have to recognise that there's a wider cut to public spending in Scotland through the advent of universal credit, which is going to roll out across Scotland in the coming year, and that's going to be dramatic for many people in our country, because we're seeing basically for every £10 cut of the system, only £1 put back into our welfare system, and that is going to be seriously damaging for the poorest people in Scotland.
Do you accept, though, there has been some progress in this budget on universal credit?
Well, that's come after massive cross-party pressure, mainly from the Labour Party, on how traumatic the universal credit rollout has been for so many people, including my constituents, which are amongst the poorest people in Scotland. And we've made it clear the trauma and the damage this is causing. And I think the government are simply so shamefaced by it that they had to concede, including from their own backbenchers. It was clear that it was unmanageable.
If we go back to the rebate or the cancelled liability for VAT on the police and fire services in Scotland, now they're not going to obviously be charged VAT in future, but there's a bit of a spat this evening about whether they should actually get a rebate. What do you think?
Well, we were disappointed to see that the £140 million that's already been squandered with the VAT charges in Scotland on fire and rescue services wasn't rebated. But we have to remember that the SNP opted to go into this with their eyes open. They knew from the outset this is going to be an issue, because Ian Murray tabled an amendment at the Scotland Act 2 years ago to exempt Scotland's fire and rescue services from VAT, and the SNP didn't support it. And similarly, the SNP were offered a solution by Unison that would allow them to centralise Scotland's fire and rescue services without becoming VAT liable, and they also disregarded that. So whilst the Tories have been very late in the day in coming forward to amend this and ameliorate this problem, let's not forget that it was the SNP that walked into this knowing full well the risks associated with recentralising fire and rescue services.
Well, we are where we are, though. Would Labour reimburse the money?
Well, we're committed to reimbursing it. Yeah, we were committed to ensuring that there's no detriment from that centralisation of fire and rescue services. So we would have committed to a rebate of £140 million that has already been lost as a result of this centralisation.
OK, well, thank you very much for speaking to us. That's the Shadow Scotland Minister, Paul Sweeney.